The NFL and college football season is in full swing, and BetOnline has you covered with the best odds, biggest promotions, and live in-game betting on all your favorite teams, including the NBA and the NHL. Head to BetOnline today to stay updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Well, welcome to the Media Roundtable podcast special edition. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. A lot of things are happening in our industry right now, and we've been talking about some of the news with us as an organization, announcing our coming together with Veritone One in the coming months ahead. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We've got some big news going on that the world is watching, and that's the 2024 U.S. presidential election. We are recording this on Monday, the day before the official election is to transpire. There's a lot to talk about here, and we're going to try to narrow most of the discussion. This really isn't about our personal opinions about politics or anything like that. Everything we do is in service of the chief audio officer, the marketer who is really trying to figure out how to derive as much value from spoken word media as possible, sometimes creator-based media, video or not with video. It's a hard job to do, and politics is one of the reasons that it's so hard. All of the polarization that we've seen in the last, arguably 8 years, 4 years, it's been messy. And it's actually the reason that we started doing this podcast, was to try to give brands some thinking and perspectives on how to navigate a very complicated and fragmented media ecosystem that in some ways it's the same old business that it's been since the beginning of our democracy. There's always been two sides doing battle in the public eye and, trying to leverage media assets for their own agenda. But there's also something that's been a little bit different in the last 4 years, and it certainly has confounded marketers that are trying to figure out how to reach the right audiences through deeply engaged platforms and programs where consumers are really bought in and interested in the content that's being provided by usually a spokesperson or through a conversation between host and guest. But to do that in a way that drives business outcomes and doesn't compromise your personal values when there's so much kind of good versus evil thrown around by both sides, has made the world very hard to operate in. So what we're doing today is bringing in three other experts who work in this business alongside of me within Oxford Road. And we want to get some different perspectives from some people that I think have some real history trying to navigate these issues from all sides of the industry. The first of those is our good friend and audio legend, Kraig Kitchin. Kraig, welcome to the Media Roundtable podcast. We're glad to have you with us, especially for this conversation.
Thank you. Hello, Dan. Hi, Tess. Hi, Neal.
And since you've teed them up, we also have Tess Ryan, who is Associate Media Director at Oxford Road, and Neal Lucey, who is EVP of Strategy and Insights at Oxford Road. And, all veterans in the media buying space, all who have had to navigate these types of issues for a long time. And so welcome everybody to the program. So, it's funny, when this thing actually goes out on Wednesday, I think most of us are thinking that, yeah, we're probably not going to have any results to actually, like, there's not going to be anything definitive. It's not like we're going to have the elections we remember where it all gets settled, somebody conceded late at night, and we're now moving, we're kind of accepting the outcome and moving along. This thing could get messy for a long time. So it's really not about, our discussion today is not about who, the horse race and who's going to win and how do we think it's all going to shake out. I think it's more about the process and how that process has changed, and how the industry has changed over time. And so to kind of set the table, Neal, I want to put you up first to explain why are people calling this the podcast election? What is it that has happened in this cycle that is new from all the cycles you've seen in the past and that's starting to get so much attention in this industry?
All right. Let's start with just the rise of podcasting in the past 4 or 5 years and just the growth of audience that's occurred. I mean, I think that that's a big factor in just in both candidates, both Trump and Harris, embracing podcasting from a guest perspective. I want to qualify that because they haven't really embraced it from an advertising spending perspective. They're not doing much in ad spend in podcasting, but they've embraced podcasting from a guest perspective. I think a lot of it has to do with the rise of the audience. I think the other element is the environment of the conversation that occurs in the podcast that isn't distilled into 30 minutes or 60 minutes or a soundbite where you can actually have a meaningful conversation with a host. I mean, Joe Rogan talked to Donald Trump for 3 hours. You cannot get that on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. They cannot program to have that extended time of a conversation where you can delve into a range of topics and go deeper in areas in other places. And then I think that it's to some degree you can find safe environments to go on to. So Harris went on to call her daddy. She went on to, I think, All the Smoke. So finding places where you can have a conversation where you feel like you can be comfortable in that space. So I think that has it has a lot to do with the rise of the audience of podcasting. I think it has a lot to do with being able to have a longer narrative and speak directly to listeners versus having it distilled into sound bites.
Thank you. Before we move off of this, Neal, so I totally accept that two of the big components here are, that the audience has gotten bigger, definitely, and so now it's seen as like a mainstream media channel. But then also, what we talk about is like this canvas for the free and open exchange of ideas. You get to unpack a conversation in ways that other media types just don't allow, right? But is there any evidence that one of the reasons they may be coming to this platform is because it actually has a greater impact or return on investment for them from a time standpoint? Is there any evidence that it moves the needle with voters more so than, how an impression might be if they're on MSNBC or Fox or whatever?
I don't know that there is. Trump was on Joe Rogan, 40 million views and counting on YouTube. And that's just YouTube, right? So that doesn't count the Spotify listens. That doesn't count what iTunes listens. It doesn't count listenership on other platforms. Yet you would expect that would make a big impact, right? I mean, that's a huge audience. That's like an NFL size audience that he was able to reach through Joe Rogan.
You don't see that in other channels. I mean, is there is anything that's being said on Meet the Press or Good Morning America or anywhere else even getting close to the amount of traction? And it's what's amazing to me is trying to keep up with some of the legacy media coverage of the election and hearing them reference how Kamala performed on Club Shay Shay or didn't. And, it's kind of crazy to hear the reverence that these untraditional methods of reaching people, the credibility that's been instilled is not something I think we've seen before. And I would say, from our perspective, look, we've measured the performance of advertisements on these channels, and we know pound for pound, a podcast impression hits harder than a traditional media impression, period, right? And so it's not surprising, especially when you start getting into the tens of millions of reach.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because you had asked, like, has it really made a measurable impact?
Yeah.
And the polls they've been so close for so long, and depending on who, like what poll, it's like 48, 47%,
It's hard. Yeah, no, it would be hard to do that, especially because, these podcasts are generally national or international audiences. And, as we're told, there's only a few counties and states that really matter in this election, and most of us don't qualify in that.
we
So,
don't live there.
yeah, so it's doing the attribution on this one is tough. I want to keep moving the conversation along here. Kraig, uh, gosh, your background, worth repeating some of it here just so people understand the perspective that you're bringing to the table. As somebody who's not only given decades of their life to spoken word media, but who was really in the room where it happened, through the consolidations in the 80s and 90s, and the kind of doing away of the fairness doctrine, and the different ways that media has been present, and building Premiere and working with voices like Rush Limbaugh, or other political podcasters across the aisle. You've really had the ringside seat. And so when you look at what is being called the podcast election, Kraig, what has happened? What has changed during the course of your career in how this type of media is being used, and how brands are thinking about it?
Sure. Podcasting is the new talk radio. Simple as that. For a long, long time, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, there was an ongoing conversation in talk radio that was amiable, conversant, informative, folksy. In the 80s, conversation started to evolve on broadcast radio to have a political slant or the expression of points of views. And certainly by the early 1990s, you could listen to a program for 10 minutes and you knew exactly where the host stood, whether or not he was or she was a locally hosted personality or a nationally syndicated personality. If their show included conversations about politics, you knew exactly where they were. And politicians use that to a large extent to reach their audiences. We saw something called Air America on broadcast radio, for instance, which was a progressive, liberal leaning conversation that was created, which everybody perceived as a counter thought to the popularity of people like Rush Limbaugh or Michael Savage or Sean Hannity's rise or Glenn Beck's rise on broadcast radio. Even though National Public Radio did for a long time a very good and informative job of being a mirror back to individuals who had a left-leaning point of view in our nation. But now all of a sudden, starting in a year like 2017, podcasting really took on a place where it was a definitive thought process for individuals seeking to get smarter for free or form their opinions on politics in America. And I use 2017 because it's when Pod Save America came into existence. It was co-hosted by 4 individuals who were speechwriters in the White House under the Obama administration. And we all know how America felt in 2017. We had a new president and Donald J. Trump. We had half the nation feel like, hey, our run under the Obama administration and the policies that that group brought in, we're not finished with that. In fact, we really desire that feeling. We need that feedback. And Pod Save America did an excellent job of really providing that. And it showed those that are left of center, podcasting really is an effective way to connect with audiences, and particularly audiences under 40, because I don't think anybody over the age of 40 is ever going to preset an AM radio station on a broadcast radio station in America so that they can seek out a point of view. So I'm not surprised that in 2024, all the smoke would get Kamala Harris's attention and her priority to record on a weekend in Los Angeles and then just have maybe one of the largest download numbers, or Call Her Daddy would reach out to both Kamala Harris's campaign and President Trump's campaign and welcome each of the candidates on for a conversation. Or Theo Vaughn as an example, or any number of others that are there. It was a purposeful media strategy on the part of both campaigns to reach an audience under the age of 50 for sure, and certainly under the age for 40, and try to make them believe that that candidate was the best one. So it's a renaissance and a validation that podcasting in audio form and in video form really does matter. And to look at the numbers that Neal speaks about in the way of Joe Rogan's reach, when he says it, surpasses some of the ratings of some of the most popular NFL games, which today is the largest ratings vehicle in network television, he speaks the truth.
It's amazing to see. I think if we just, for those of us that have been dabbling in this spoken word media and really put a lot of chips on this podcast idea, it's almost like if there was a question before of if this is really a durable type of media, and a platform that's here to stay, I think this kind of solidifies that, right? I think there are because it has become the modern day whistle stop tour, right? Is to stop on these podcasts and mix it up with communities.
It's a friendly, effective place in which to go. I also think that both candidates and their campaigns inherently think that the MSNBC viewer, the CNBC viewer, the CNN viewer might be predisposed to a fair extent for candidate Harris. And similarly, somebody watching or listening to Fox News or paying attention to right of center cable networks or streaming networks, that by and large, their decision is already made. So I've seen less reliance by both candidates, seeking out those extra times. Sure, they participate in an occasional town hall, but they're not going overtime to be a part of those shows or the audio versions of programs like the ones hosted by Clay Travis and Buck Sexton or Sean Hannity or any number of other conservative-minded individuals. They too are like those cable networks. They've made their points known. They feature sound clips every day in every one of their programs, bolstering and re-supporting those candidates' opinions. But in these podcasts, you do have that time to really unpack and get to know somebody. And because it's friendly environments, you see both candidates smile, relax, engage, lean in the most comfortable of ways. Right?
Yeah, and it's like you're hanging out with them, right? I mean, one of the advantages of the medium is that it's oftentimes about companionship, and it's so unusual. I mean, since Kraig, just since you started giving that context, I've gotten 2 campaign texts, right, that are very oversimplified versions of very complicated people and dynamics. And whether it's cable news or the headlines you're scrolling through or social media, to get away from the soundbite and to actually be able to get to know a candidate and hear something explained and discussed is so rare.
Yes.
And I just think it's the beauty of what we're involved with and why it's so important. So I hope that, this is a moment where the industry is also getting its due for bringing something new to the conversation, to the national conversation. And Neal, I know you got more to get in here, but I want to hear from Tess a little bit first. Tess, you've been very patient with us. And as somebody who, you have spent, most of your career, I think, working beyond just audio, right? Audio has been one of many, and now that you've been partnered with us, everything's all creator based or audio all the time, right? When you think about the way that the advertising community looks at these channels, how is podcasting different? How is it perceived differently than what you have been accustomed to with every other type of media that you've worked in?
I would say the biggest one is just the brand safety component. I think, as marketers and brands that are working with agencies like us want to ensure that things are brand safe. I think just the very chattable nature of podcasting and conversations that happen kind of leaves that open. So I think that's like a blessing and a curse, if you will, just because there's opportunity there for someone to not just get in that digestible nugget of messaging from a politician or whatever that they want to do, but they're actually able to have a conversation in context, but not only in context, in a casual way, which I think really kind of gives both the marketers and also the politicians kind of an edge there, right? Because it lets them stretch their message or stretch their exposure a little bit longer in a way that they can't get in a 30 or 60-second clip.
And do you think that right now brands are more or less attracted to it because of the unknown piece with brand safety? Do you think that they're looking at this and saying, well, creator is really where the influence is at, and so even though there's a bit of a tax in having to work through some of these unique challenges, that they still want to do it? Or do you feel that there's a bottleneck for brands being able to fully leverage these channels because it does have those inherent risks that haven't been fully reconciled yet?
So there's lots of things that I think that you can to get brands to feel a little better about it. Like there's technology out there, as agencies, we want to be protective of what our clients run in, and we want them to be in the conversation if that's where they want to be. But if they are scared about too far left or too far right leaning with political content and being exposed, and there are tools now that will kind of let us sort of scope that out in a way I don't think that we could before, which I think opens up opportunity to them being more, flexible or open to being in more content if they feel like those checks and balances are in place, or if they feel like we have a pulse on it a little bit more and it's not just sort of the wild, wild west politically.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody.
I wanted to just pick up on what Tess was talking about from brand safety and kind of the challenges, both opportunities and challenges associated with podcasting, right? The parts I want to talk about in terms of the appeal to advertisers, I think that as podcasting is kind of from the get-go at the top of the podcast, talking about just the rise in the audience of podcasting, that makes it more appealing to audiences. I think another big appeal is the kind of the outsized impact that advertising makes in podcasting. So The only other media channel that really has impact as much on consumers is probably television. Podcasting does that. Podcasting generates strong recall. It changes brand perceptions, increases brand awareness. So those are all appealing to advertisers. So from just a place to be, a place to advertise in, those are factors that are in favor of podcasting. And the last part is the audience age. The average audience age of podcasting still hovers around 40. Only other place you can kind of get that younger audience is social media. But social media, you're getting it in the scrolling environment, and how much are those messages actually sticking with consumers as they're scrolling?
That's such a great point, Neal. That is spot on.
Guys, can we talk about Tony Hinchcliffe a little bit here?
His island of garbage.
Well, whether or not that's his island and whether or not that's an island of garbage, that's I guess that's why it became such a hot topic, right? You had, just to catch up anybody that wasn't paying attention to this story, you have a comedian who, by the way, like, we were down the street from the Comedy Store for many years, and we would do a lot of team trips to the comedy clubs. It was a great place to hang out, and we'd see acts like Kill Tony, which is his kind of shtick, and pre-pandemic, and he'd get a little room at the Comedy Store, and during the pandemic, I think he said there were like 3 people that would show up to these things, and he'd get a couple comedians to sit with him, and he'd give amateurs like a minute to go tell jokes, and then they'd either say, "Oh, those jokes are funny," or "You're terrible," or whatever, and that was their bit. And then a few weeks ago, he puts on a show and takes over Madison Square Garden before Trump's rally to kind of make his closing arguments at Madison Square Garden. That's how much this podcaster and how much the industry of podcasting has evolved to be able to really fill seats and do live events. When he did that, or when he spoke at the roast of Tom Brady, I don't remember anybody being like angry about this guy, because he's an insult comic and that's what he does. What has happened in the world where now you have this fusion of an insult comic who kind of came up from doing things that were unstructured and free form to say whatever you want, and then you mix that with a political rally where you're making closing arguments for the conservative party in America? How did this happen, and what does this mean?
Oh, this is...
Let's start there.
Sure. So I'd throw out 2 conversation starters to go into it. A comedian is going to do what a comedian does, right? Particularly when you tell him or her not to do something.
Right.
They're going to double down and do it. I think anybody who knows of Tony's comedic stylings knows what you're going to get, an insult comment. Judging from just even the in-person audience reaction at Madison Square Garden, and full disclaimer, I was not there, but I'm reading and hearing how the audience reacted to the infamous punchline about Puerto Rico, which was in horrible taste.
Yep.
The audience didn't respond well to it.
Nope.
And I think because he was a high-profile comedian, and the Trump campaign is looking for positive endorsements from individuals you might not expect, and we've seen the same of candidate Harris this past week as well, with her welcoming of musicians and athletes endorsing her publicly. Tony Hinchcliffe was one of 20 speakers that day at Madison Square Garden who had been given 5 or 7 or 8 minutes to speak to an audience in a day-long diatribe of conversation about Donald Trump and where America stands and how America may benefit from his re-election. But a horrible choice of words, a horrible placement, and on top of it, just a black stain on that Trump campaign, because they didn't go far enough to distance themselves from it or to dispute the value that Puerto Rico and its citizens really bring. But I'm not surprised. It's no different than President Obama once went to Los Angeles and sat down with Mark Maron at WTF. And I don't know if anybody in this audience remembers that, but it was one of those head turners where, oh my God, WTF merits a visit from Barack Obama, and a great conversation to be had. And it was actually one of the first times that many Americans heard the relaxed side of President Barack Obama. But everybody knew going into it, Mark Maron's a comedian first and foremost. There's going to be jokes, there's going to be offhand. That was the natural environment of which a politician stepped into, knowing full well that maybe Mark Maron is going to tame it down a little bit, but it's still going to be a comedy stand-up routine, right? So you expect that. You didn't expect Tony Hinchcliffe to be at a political rally offering off-color jokes. And if I had to dig into the forensic of it, I would say that somebody like Robert Kennedy Jr. or somebody else who knows this comedian well invited him, endorsed it, and reinforced it to the campaign organizers that he deserves to have 5 or 8 minutes there. That's my long-winded take on how that happened and how poorly it represented that campaign that day.
Hear, hear. Neal, Tess, you want to get in on this topic?
I mean,
you're free to pass.
I think I won't pass. Why not? Seeing the Tom Brady roast, this is what Tony Hinchcliffe does, right? So and if you probably took some of what he said in that roast outside of that roast, could be deeply insulting to ethnicities, like race, a whole slew of people. But in the roast environment, it was funny. You took that same person and you put him in front of at a political event. He's going to do what he's going to do, and he did. And then it's just it's just the wrong environment. It was the wrong environment for him to say what he said.
Yeah. I agree. Poor taste, terrible joke, but also sort of on the campaign, like that's how they operate. That's their sense of humor. It's not like he's been hiding who he was. This is kind of how he goes. He's tongue in cheek. So, that's so interesting. We're bringing up the Tom Brady roast. That's exactly what I kept thinking about too when that incident happened. I was like, oh, this is sort of, how sometimes comedians can deliver.
Well, and I think that, I mean, this, to me, this is like this one subtopic is like a full show discussion or longer, because I think there's so many implications. I mean, for one thing, what a great example of how context matters, and what is appropriate in one environment is not necessarily appropriate in another. I think we all agree that if he wants to say, cutting things about Tom Brady and the people on the dais at the Tom Brady roast, that's fine. But when you're at a public event making closing arguments for the presidential campaign and you decide to roast and attack the citizens of Puerto Rico, we all agree, stupid, unkind, unnecessary. And even though it was what he does, somebody screwed up by putting him in that environment. We all know that, right?
Right. And they didn't take into consideration that if mass media, whether or not it's in video form, in print form, and online form, if they were going to spend 90 seconds reporting on the Madison Square Garden rally or 900 words writing about it, whatever it is, they might have, if Tony Hinchcliffe hadn't been there, they may have reported on something else that might have been said that would have benefited their campaign, right?
Right.
But, a media report is only going to say, all right, President Trump was at Madison Square Garden. The lines were, around the block, 10 blocks down. Or, here is the list of people who spoke, or here's something that was prophetically said, but instead, this is what they got out of it.
Well, and I think one of the things that that bothers me about all of this is, the beauty, the blessing and the curse of an open media ecosystem. The beauty is that now we can hear perspectives from anybody, and the gatekeepers are gone, and so nobody's shielding us from viewpoints that we didn't previously have access to. And I think that's a wonderful thing, that everybody now gets to have a voice in the conversation. But decorum is dead. right? And life imitates art, and art imitates life. And you have this insult comic who gets the wrong platform, says something horribly offensive that might have made sense at his show and does not make sense in this environment. And then you have the sitting president of the United States that goes, hold my beer, let me make an even stupider statement and just make it about, you know, half of the country. Let's just take this in a whole new direction. So, you know, that this has been the garbage election. I'm sorry that it, you know, kind of snowballed into being called that from the words of a podcaster who was not governed by the FCC and wasn't really concerned about a civility score hanging over their head that said, you know, when you personally attack someone, that has consequences, and we might want to pay attention to what environments we do that in.
True. But, you know, compare that to, let's say, the responsibility that Charlemagne the God and DJ Envy did with the Breakfast Club interview with Kamala Harris, you know, as an example. Just, you know, just one. Or Theo Vaughn took on when he had the chance to earn Donald Trump's presence in his podcast, or, you know, Dan Bongino in his Rumble video podcast. When they're ready to take it seriously, they take it seriously. They realize the magnitude of the event. And Dan, to your point, this election matters. And these individuals prepared, they took it seriously. In some cases, they traveled to other cities. They set up they certainly put in probably 4 times the normal preparation they might have for those interviews. I'm glad they took it seriously. I just wish that the Trump campaign would have taken a little more seriously who they would have invited to be on the pulpit that day at Madison Square Garden.
Totally agree.
Who doesn't understand the assignment there?
Yeah. Go ahead, Neal.
I was going to say, I hope for the next election that the candidates take actually advertising in podcasts seriously as well. So maybe why not take advantage of the free airtime? So if you can get it for free, go for it. But I think by Magellan AI's estimate, Harris, who you would think probably would advertise more, has only spent $190,000 reported in podcasting. Donald Trump is around $7,000 this cycle. He actually spent more in podcasting in 2020. He spent 107, like reported 170,000 in 2020. So they've certainly embraced podcasting from
an authentic, organic standpoint, but they're not as big on the pre-rolls and the dynamically inserted ads. Go figure.
Yeah, no, like, I mean, I think part of it is get it for free, but that's a prime audience for both candidates, right?
That's a significant point, Neal.
Yeah. So, look, I'm going to ask you guys one final question, and I'm going to set the table a little bit. I'll give my kind of response first. The question I want to end with here, knowing this is, you know, we can only really scratch the surface on any of this, but it's a big week. It's a big week for the country. I think a lot of people have been holding their breath, and I think a lot of us are concerned about the instability just after the votes are cast, but before everybody accepts an outcome and we have a peaceful transfer of power. I think we're all a little bit on edge, and probably will be for a few weeks or months. But we can only control what we can control, right? And you know, we're doing a lot in this industry. We've just announced our own, you know, consolidation and attempt to build a more sustainable ecosystem in the world of spoken word media. And so the question is, what do you want to see happen over the next 4 years in our industry so that we can do the thing we say at the end of all of these messages about influencing responsibly? And how might that look, whether it's from where we sit in a buying function, or, you know, Kraig, you work with talent in addition to the support you give at Oxford Road. You know, we have a message that we put out through some of these things like our podcast and our newsletter. You know, we're all looking at the same situation and going, how do we just do better for us? And one thing that I think we have done in the last 4 years, so this is where I give my own answer to it. One is helping to bring a little more transparency and visibility into the quality of the conversations that we're asking brands to support. And I got to tell you, if with the civility score concept that we've been pushing here for more than a year, a brand would not have to worry that Tony Hinchcliffe is going to insult the people of Puerto Rico, or that President Biden is going to insult half of everybody else, if we are actually measuring and reporting how much personal attack is happening against individuals or groups of individuals. This is the problem. This is why we're talking about it. It's not because somebody's Democrat or Republican. It's because we're personally attacking people. And my hope is that we can follow the examples of some of the shows that have been using their platforms to influence responsibly. David Axelrod has a 96 civility score. We know who he's voting for. Ezra Klein, 96. Rachel Maddow, 87. Hugh Hewitt has an 84. Glenn Beck has an 84. Bill O'Reilly has an 83. Sean Hannity has a 79. Then you have people that don't sit decidedly on one side or the other. You had the campaign managers that brought together voices from both sides. They had a 91 civility score. Honestly, with Barry Weiss, where she just recently brought together two people from opposite sides of this election, she got an 89. There are people that are doing good work and are trying to champion complicated conversations and are doing so without having to attack the character of their opponents. And I want us to keep advocating for that. Anything else that we can do as an industry to evolve from here and to you know, if this is the podcast election, if we're going to have another one, how do we do it better? That's my question for you guys. And Kraig, I'll put you on in the hot seat first.
Sure. I'm glad to hear of the civility scores of the 10 individuals that you mentioned, because there is room in America for civility, honest to goodness conversation, an exchange of ideas without having to insult individuals. Individuals who watched television years ago saw it on Sunday morning television programs where two individuals on opposite sides of the aisle in the House or Senate could get together and have a debate, an open debate of ideas. We're seeing it now in the podcasting environment where one candidate may go to speak with a podcaster and be able to air it out and to show the human side of that individual. I hope in the next 4 years that we see podcasters emerge to have the trust of both sides of the aisle, so that in the same environment, whether or not it was Joe Rogan or it's, Who's Your Daddy, or any number of other podcasts that have critical mass, that both candidates would actually be able to participate in a conversation with civility, both trusting the host that it will be a friendly environment for them that they could take on. I think that would be the true hallmark of the advancement of this form of audio distribution, and a proud moment of which I think we would see advertisers and sponsors really want to be a part of it, because they know that people would be listening with both ears, and a disproportionate number of those listeners would respond to the advertising message. That's what I hope to see.
Beautiful. I want to see that too, Kraig. All right, who wants to follow Kraig Kitchin?
that just might drop the mic, right?
Yeah.
I would say mine is from a more personal perspective. Sorry.
That's great.
It may not be from as much of an industry perspective. This is going to come out on Wednesday. On Wednesday, roughly half of the country is going to be happy, and roughly half of the country, well, maybe not. It might be in 2 weeks or a month.
There will be a Wednesday in the future where people feel.
But there will be a Wednesday in the future, and it's I think it's incumbent of us that civility starts with the individual. It starts with yourself, and trying to understand the other side of things, and trying to understand it from somebody else's perspective. Why did they vote for Trump? Why did they vote for Harris? And understanding it from their perspective, and not just your perspective. I think we all think we're civil, but if we're all civil, then why is there lack of civility, right?
Right.
Here. Tess, we'll give you last word.
My favorite. What a gift. Um, as a woman, and for the last word, that's amazing. I would say that my hopes is I just want a little bit more clarity, both from the podcast host or show standpoint, in addition to even brands on what they're considering civil. I mean, I think that there's basic, understandings of what civility is and what that means to a brand versus what that means to a show content wise and how they want to be known. But how do we keep that sort of we don't want to go scripted, but we want more of a controlled, productive conversation between two politicians, but also like the why are they having them on the show? What's the, not just because it's relevant, but like also what are they what really made that host want to have that political guest on the show? Just understanding the reasoning behind it, and then sort of a framework of how we're going to address if it gets into spicy, maybe not so civil area, how do we navigate that? Because we obviously want people to be real. We don't want it to be this very like just civility score ourselves out of reality, but we want a polite, diplomatic, real take on whatever it is they're going to talk about.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's where this stuff is so complicated. There is no easy button for any of it, and like just to use an example, we advocate for brands to continue supporting comedy where insults may be more appropriate, and the civility score, is certainly going to have a different effect if you use it in that type of environment. But hopefully, a brand at least has the luxury of knowing the difference of which environment it's showing up in and can set their tolerance levels according to that context versus like, I think we've all been stuck with a lot of one size fits all. And that's where it gets messy really fast and the applications are hard. So we're going to keep working at it and we're going to keep talking about it on this podcast. It is very much at the heart of why we've begun this conversation and why we're going to keep it going. And hopefully, at least from our little corner of the industry, we can make a positive impact on the next cycle over the next 4 years. So, Tess, Neal, Kraig, thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. I'll have you know that this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain but edify, and to build bridges across differences, preserving fair-minded conversation around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer and you want to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road. You can also reach out to Veritone One, who we have an increasing amount in common with. Go to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'll keep reaching you with our messages there, and we'd love to hear from you. If you have anything you want to share, info@mediaroundtable.com. Check out Ad Infinitum, that is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast, if you really want to know how it works. And thank you to not only our co-panelists, but also Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neal, the team at Sharp Pen Media, the team at Podcast One. As always, guys, influence responsibly.
Hey, this is Jim Beaver from The Jim Beaver Show. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games for pro and college games. With the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, the Major League Baseball playoffs, NHL, NBA, and even political prop bets, BetOnline has it all. And if that isn't enough, BetOnline also has the best odds and info on MMA and professional boxing too. When the game's over, head on over to the BetOnline online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of their 150-plus slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here.